Opening titles have a tough job to create a mood that draws you into the world of the show you're about to watch in what is essentially a very short music video. It's an art form that is increasingly literally being overlooked. Skip intro might be the second most clicked button after skip ad on YouTube. Like and subscribe. I'm not gonna lie, personally, there are very few intros that I don't just skip, but one of those exceptions is Cowboy Bebop. In this video, I'm going to deconstruct why the visual and audio combo of this intro sequence slaps so hard, look into the influences on its design and composition, and see how it's impacted our visual culture in the 2 decades between the original and the new Netflix remake. So, let's jam. When Cowboy Bebop first aired to English-speaking audiences on Adult Swim in 2001, there was really nothing like it. Apart from Akira in 1988, it's difficult to think of an anime aimed at grown-ups that had as much crossover success before. Bebop genre mashes hard, combining not only space and jazz, but also drawing from spaghetti westerns, noir detective thrillers, cyberpunk, and more, and the result is a flavor entirely its own. The opening credits, set to the infectiously bombastic Tank by Yoko Kanno and the Seatbelts, draws inspiration from its own stew of influences. To begin, we have to go back to some of the pioneers of opening title design. Amongst the iconic designers behind these titles were names like Saul Bass, the creator of intros to many Hitchcock classics like Vertigo, Psycho, and North by Northwest. Bass made bold use of color, type, and shape to make his titles, and it's not hard to connect the dots between his work and the titles for Bebop. But I think there are 2 other early trailblazers we can more directly link to its iconic look. Maurice Binder was the designer behind the titles for the James Bond franchise, and again we see similar strong sensibilities towards bold use of color in particular. But I think his titles for the Michael Caine thriller Billion Dollar Brain contain some particularly familiar elements, like these shots of our protagonist in silhouette on bold primary colors divided up into panels. But the clearest precursor to Cowboy Bebop's titles comes from designer Pablo Ferro. The man was prolific and created titles for films from Dr. Strangelove to Men in Black, but the film I'm referencing here is 1968's The Thomas Crown Affair, a heist thriller starring Steve McQueen. This was the first major studio film to use the multi-dynamic image technique invented by Canadian filmmaker Christopher Chapman only a year earlier. The technique would go on to be used in many TV opening titles through the 70s, most famously in The Brady Bunch, to the point where it later became known colloquially as the Brady Bunch effect. But that came some time after. In 1968, this was the technical cutting edge. It was an extremely labor-intensive process involving an optical film printer, physical matte frames, and an animation camera. Something easy to forget in the digital era when it can be done fairly easily with any basic editing software. Ferro used this technique very effectively to create a sense of cool and intrigue for the Thomas Crown Affair, and the echoes of that are definitely not subtle in the intro to Cowboy Bebop. In the world of jazz, it's hard to overlook the impact of Blue Note Records, not only for the music but also for their iconic album cover designs, especially those from the 50s and 60s. There's a fantastic video on Vox looking at the making of some of those iconic covers, which I'll link down in the video description. But as far as visual motifs, again we see the repetition of grids, rectangular panels, and bold saturated color. The font used for the English title in the show's logo is based on Bookman Bold, a thick, old-style serif revival very popular during the 60s and 70s, which is visually quite similar to the slab serif font Clarendon used in many iconic Blue Note covers. Entering into the world of jazz album collecting in Japan, it's difficult to imagine that the show creator and director Shinichiro Watanabe would not have seen many of these albums in the record stores of Tokyo. As pieces of graphic design, they are really quite timeless and effortlessly cool. It's pretty difficult not to put them up on display for any vinyl store owner. Whether intentional or subconscious, there are many visual echoes of these album designs in the opening titles to Cowboy Bebop. On the topic of jazz, that theme song by Yoko Kanno may be the MVP of this intro piece. So to take a deeper look into the music, I reached out to musician and jazz YouTuber Timbo Bennett to break things down for us. But before we dive in, I want to take a moment to thank this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people like you. It's a place to explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. They have a great selection of classes in graphic design, typography, music production, and more. One class I found inspiring recently is graphic design, create a bold and colorful album cover. This one is taught by Temi Coker, a musician, digital artist, and illustrator based in Texas. The class is a great way to practically explore some of the elements we've talked about in this video: color, shape, and composition, through designing an original cover for your favorite playlist or album. Temi takes you through the whole process, from gathering inspiration, iterating with sketches, to producing the final artwork with Adobe Illustrator. Even if you've never worked with Illustrator before, it's very clear and easy to follow. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, so this means there's no ads and that they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever creativity takes you. So use the link below, check them out, and learn something new. Thanks very much to Skillshare for supporting the channel. Now to break down the fantastic soundtrack, over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Linus. So despite the name, the main theme of Cowboy Bebop, Tank, was not really inspired by bebop at all. It was inspired mostly by swing, or big band jazz. Bebop was a really important and influential style of jazz that was played mostly by small bands in small clubs, whereas swing was played by very large ensembles with dozens of musicians typically. Yoko Kanno was using swing for a specific reason. She was looking to channel the sound of the 60s spy theme. Now, spy themes from this era had a very particular sound. They were a combination of big band jazz, a little bit of surf rock, and the occasional spaghetti western style orchestration. Now, there are a couple of really good examples of this. Of course, there's the original James Bond film, Dr. No. There's The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And of course, the satirical Get Smart. Now, what Yoko Kanno did really expertly with Tank is that she took the elements of the 60s spy theme, boiled them down, and then turn them up to 11.
These go to 11.
I think you could compare it to how K-pop took ideas from American pop and then sort of amped them up, or how genres like Outrun or Vaporwave, which are chasing a very 80s aesthetic, they sound more like music from the 80s than any music from the 80s ever did. Let's do a quick comparison. The original Mission Impossible series theme, to the Cowboy Bebop thing. These two pieces are different and they've got very different time signatures, but there are a couple of sort of similar elements that tie them together. There's that minor bass line, the percussion grooves that sort of percolate throughout, and of course there's those big, brassy, big band hooks. Additionally, the main theme of Cowboy Bebop is a 12-bar blues. It uses the chords 1, 4, and 5 in a minor key. Now, the Mission Impossible theme also uses the chords 1, 4, and 5 in a minor key, and in the same order, but because it uses them for a different number of bars, it's not technically a blues. You could say that the chords of both songs kind of rhyme with each other. So both songs kind of have this really propelling forward momentum, but kind of a sneaky minor undertone at the same time. And while it does sound a little bit like the Mission Impossible theme song, Cowboy Bebop is definitely its own thing. I'd say it sounds like all of the 60s spy themes a little, and at the same time it doesn't sound like any of them. I think it's a good example of a kind of postmodern approach that film and television scoring took in around about the 1990s. By using a musical theme from a genre of story that the audience is familiar with, whether they sort of realize it or not, you automatically evoke the emotion of that kind of story. So while Cowboy Bebop is, spoiler, not actually about secret agents, the use of the theme evokes the kind of energy and zaniness of the spy fantasy genre of the 1960s, and it sets up a very particular expectation for you, the audience. After all, great design is about more than just looking or sounding great. It's about telling great stories.
Thanks, Tim. If you're curious to hear more fascinating stories about the history of jazz, head over to Tim's channel for more excellent content. So we've covered the influences of the past, but what about the influences of its day? Cowboy Bebop was originally released in 1998, and there are two things that immediately mark it as turn of the century. First is the pacing. The opening titles from the 60s moved at a glacial crawl compared to the opening titles of anime series in the 1990s. The pace of editing, of course, sped up overall over the course of decades. A 2010 study showed the average length between cuts in the 60s was 8 seconds, but by the mid-90s it was down to only 5. During this era, anime in particular got very fast indeed. There was of course the famous scene in Pokemon which triggered photosensitive epilepsy and the sensational media coverage which followed, but beyond special effects, cuts were very fast in the medium overall. Take a contemporary series to Cowboy Bebop, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Another classic opening, and the pace of cuts becomes quickly frenetic. Cowboy Bebop doesn't quite reach this level of speed, but it's certainly no 60s slow burner. Second, we have one of the most reviled design trends of the turn of the millennium, grunge typography. I've discussed this a bit in a previous video, but this trend was pretty inescapable from the late 1990s to the early 2000s. People in those days liked their type how they liked their denim. Highly distressed. There were many egregious things done with type during the grunge era, but the usage for Bebop is actually pretty forgivable. It was, after all, made for a Japanese audience, and the text in Japanese is legible and clean. For the English release, this Japanese text was replaced with the typeface Archon, which you might recognize from the Pulp Fiction poster, which gives a more 70s vibe overall than the original. But the distressed grunge type in English is used more like a graphic texture, not intended for the audience to read. While if you do pause and try to parse the text, it functions like a kind of manifesto for the show, it's not necessary in order to enjoy it. The Netflix live-action remake primarily targets an English-speaking audience, so for their recreated titles, they've swapped the place of the English and Japanese text, using Japanese as the graphical texture. Of course, the grunge typography treatment is toned down slightly from the original as well. I'd call this type less distressed and more slightly perturbed. The fact that Netflix decided to pay direct homage to the original opening titles shows how beloved and influential they are. In the years after Bebop appeared on Adult Swim, the channel became a breeding ground for cult animation in the US. You can see the fingerprints of Cowboy Bebop's intro all over series that were to follow on that channel. Venture Brothers, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, and the Boondocks. But perhaps most importantly, Archer didn't start on Adult Swim, but its show creators did with a cult series called Frisky Dingo before their breakthrough spy satire. While certainly in Archer's case there's a degree to which it's nodding more towards the 60s source material than Bebop itself, I feel safe in saying that if Cowboy Bebop hadn't been as influential as it was, then the intro to Archer would have made slightly different design choices than those that echo the iconic anime. Recently, many in design circles have decried the death of the intro title, and to some degree it feels like a natural extension of how our patterns of consuming video have changed. The intro title as music video makes a lot of sense for episodic broadcast television. You need that space before the meat of the plot to get into the headspace of the show you're about to watch. But in the age of binge watching, you're seeing episodes back to back. There's no need to reorient you from the outside world. Cowboy Bebop's intro is a product of a unique creative vision and an eclectic mix of influences, but also a unique time in the medium of anime and television as a whole. So if you do go back and revisit or watch the original anime for the first time, do yourself a favor and don't skip the intro. Special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon who keep this show running. My name is Linus, thank you very much for watching, and until next time,